Okay, great. Good evening, everyone. Can you please do me a favor? I always do this because I have this homesickness of being stuck at home. Can you all unmute yourself, please? I want to feel like I'm in a building with you there. Oh no, you can't unmute, can you?
We've set it up to avoid just that phenomenon, Millie. I'm sorry. But you know what? All the panelists can give you a cheer.
Okay, well, oh man, I always like to hear the voices and the loudness. Well, just give me any hand gesture, everyone, for like a hello, whatever you want to do, everybody. We'll just keep it going for a couple of seconds because my team is keeping me from talking to you. It's not fair. Let me screen. I'm in page 2, page 3, page 4. We're going to talk about this later. All righty. Good. Thank you. Still speak out loud, even if I can't hear you. I can see you. I can see your mouth and I can see your body language. So good evening, everyone. Again, for those of you that don't know me, my name is Millie Arbaje Thomas. I am the president and CEO of METCO headquarters. We are very excited to host you today. It's really an amazing night for us. You know, for those of you that have been following us for the last year, doing a couple of virtual events, this happens to be the largest RSVP that we have received, including from our annual meeting that we had a few hundred people, but this is going high up there in the several hundreds, but 500 people RSVP. So at some point we will see where we land. I always tell Colin, if we get 500, we'll end up with 250. So right now we're at 231, not bad at all. So, but this just says a lot, you know, it says a lot about the topic. It says a lot about the importance. It says a lot about why we need to be having these conversations. One of the things that we are doing at METCO headquarters in the past year is really focusing on something that we are in a position to do. And that something is convening. You know, as METCO headquarters, you know, we have 33 communities, and we have 3,200 children leaving Boston every day to go into these 33 communities. And many times everyone is doing their own thing, focusing on their district and in the community, but METCO headquarters has the ability to do exactly what we're doing tonight, bring us all together every once in a while to talk about, you know, things of importance and to celebrate important, you know, milestones. So this is part of our METCO University. We started METCO University a few years ago. I've been on the job 3 years now, and we started a few initiatives. And one of those initiatives is METCO University. And METCO University is the opportunity to come together, to learn, to build skills, to network with one another, to convene, and to talk about important topics that would make all of us feel invigorated to do something better. This past year, when we did our December event, if you were there, I talked about 3 things, and I'm probably gonna forget what they are, the 3 I's. So be intentional about the work that needs to be done around integration. We may insist that there's change happening all the way around you. Whatever your role is, insist and insist and insist. And then inspired, remain inspired in this work, because, you know, the fear is that we had this hype right now going on around, you know, racial equity and becoming anti-racist people and institutions. But, you know, when the hype comes down, things go back to normal. And we know that normal is not normal, and normal is not good. Okay, so I want to just leave you with those 3 words. Be intentional about your work, insist on things to change, and remain inspired, because this work is here for the long run. So today we welcome you at the beginning of our METCO University series. It's a brand new series that we started. We have a METCO University parenting series. We have for parents of the METCO program. We have a youth series where we actually work with our teenagers from around all the districts to do different workshops. Like yesterday, we did one on financial aid and how to prepare for college. We have an anti-racist racism learning series where we are actually working with our districts to provide trainings and support around changing their practices. And today begins our solution series. And our solution series are opportunities for us to talk with our constituencies about what we can do to make our communities, not just METCO, but our communities better, because we know that the program cannot thrive if we don't have welcoming communities that are not only willing to receive the students in the classrooms, but willing to actually change the communities in which they live, change them around housing, change them around economics, change them around education, all of those things that make some of the basic necessities in life inaccessible for others. So we welcome you today to this solution series. And in the very first one that we are providing out of many other ones to come. What I wanted to do as a quick icebreaker, since I can't hear you, if you can actually put in the chat really quickly, just your name, what town you're from, and just what motivated you to be here. But don't start it. Hold on. Don't start. Stop. Because this is going to be called a Zoom bomb. So don't start. So your name, your town, and why you're here. It can be one word. It can be two words about why you're here. I want to learn. I want to change. I want to work on housing, whatever it is. So 1, 2, 3, and say it in the chat. Boom, boom, boom. I want to see a couple of hundred stuff coming in. Wow, you guys are fast. Framingham in the house. Look at that. Newton, Needham. A lot of Needham, Wakefield, Sharon, Higham, Brooklyn, Lexington, Wayland. Somerville. Okay. Well, we might have to go expand over to some other communities that we're not in yet. I know that our panelists have brought their own crew to follow them. Right, awesome. Thank you so much. Just keep those coming as we get everything started. I'm gonna go ahead and pass the microphone right now to someone who actually can speak and it's not on silent. So I'm very happy and pleased today to present to you one of my staff members who has been a right hand since months into me starting this job, who has really been instrumental in helping me to implement many initiatives, many sleepless nights, trying to keep up with all of the things that I want to do for METCO moving forward, and really believing in those things alongside me. And I'm really happy and grateful to have Colin with me, the Director of Communications, Outreach, and Engagement, who's not only responsible for the rebranding of METCO in the last couple of years, and our visibility, our branding, our messaging, but also responsible for finding opportunities and ways to engage our community. And like I said, we have the METCO University, but we also have METCO Presents, which we'll talk about that a little later, to invite you to some theater events about race. And we have many other ways where we're engaging our community. And I know that he's very excited about today, because this was literally his baby. It's literally his baby. His baby was like, I really want to find ways to bring as many suburban communities together, because Millie, those are my peeps. Those are my people. I'm a suburban guy. I'm from Brookline. I'm a white male. And I know that I can work with my people to try to do something to really hold us all accountable and do better. And this was his first baby for Solution Series. And as you can see, we have people from everywhere, but the majority of people we have here today are from the suburbs. A few of the 100 RSVPs are from the suburbs, and rightfully so, because that is the people that we want to work with to really bring about change. So I'm very grateful to have Colin here, to have led this idea and this initiative, and to have gathered the people that are here today. And I also want to thank the rest of my team. We have, I think, the entire METCO headquarters here, about 13 of us. You will see that's with an asterisk in the chat, and we are at the very top of that so that you can see who's here. But I want to thank everybody. If the METCO staff, if you want to just wave really quickly, because I don't know, we don't have time to say everything and introduce everyone, but please wait for a little bit. Just wave, stay waving so people can see who it is. In this virtual world, when we don't have too much time, we have to be able to do introductions in different ways. So thank you, team, for being here. And thank you for all the tech support and behind the scenes to make this happen. And Colin, take it away. Thank you and welcome, everyone.
Thank you, Millie. I'm so excited you're all here. I am, as Millie said, a dad in Brookline, and that's why I'm here. I grew up not realizing that I was living in a segregated society. And METCO is an important way to help people see that they might be living in a segregated society, that if they don't know that already, like it was for me. it is, tonight is an opportunity to do something that hasn't been done in a while, which was actually a pretty fundamental part of how METCO got started, namely building coalitions across majority white suburbs. So I'm so excited. So many of you here tonight are members or leaders of racial justice organizations in METCO towns. Seeing a lot of that in the chat. So that's super exciting. And my partner tonight is an example of that, one of the co-founders of Families Organizing for Racial Justice in Newton. So I'm really excited to also say hello to Vanita Vijay Raghavan, because she has been instrumental in putting this panel together, and welcome, and we'll get started. Vanita.
Well, we at Forge are delighted to work with Colin and Millie and METCO, and we welcomed Millie to Newton to present, to have a discussion with Families Organizing for Racial Justice soon after you started your post, and we look for many opportunities to collaborate and support the work. Forge is a Newton-based organization focused on building an anti-racist city together with families, schools, community members, and civic leaders through education, actions, and systemic reforms. We offer programs in the schools and the community across our 23 schools, parent-led, to enable residents to have open, proactive dialogue about how we confront racism and celebrate racial, cultural, and ethnic differences. And we've had lots of reach outs from neighboring towns asking, ways we can collaborate. And so this seemed like a perfect opportunity through METCO to really have a discussion across 30 towns that have a lot of similar kinds of issues to navigate. I'm delighted to introduce our panelists, starting with our moderator, Charlene Bay, who is Newton, local English teacher at Newton North High School, so my town, and then Gretchen Cook-Anderson from neighboring Needham. She's a board member for the Needham Diversity Initiative, and a highly active civic leader. Dania Myers, Wellesley High School junior, part of the METCO program, and David Scharfenberg, who's at the Boston Globe and authored the piece that hopefully many of you read on the level of segregation that we see in Massachusetts and that many people sort of don't think about, and don't think about it like it's in their hometown. And I will turn it over to Charlene now.
All right, thank you so much. I just want to say thank you to Millie, to Vanita, and to Colin for putting this together. Thank you to Gretchen, Dania, and David for joining us on this panel. And I wanted to start off with a few things just to sort of frame the panel, talk a little bit about logistics, and then we'll jump into conversation, right? So the hope for this panel is it's a way to explore the ways segregation affects and shapes all of us, right? And the hope is that everyone leaves this panel thinking about the ways they are connected to systems of segregation, and everyone commits to taking action or continuing to take action, right? So if you're someone in the audience for whom segregation is something that happens somewhere else, right, we encourage you to think about the ways segregation is present in your own communities, has been present in your own communities historically. If you're someone who has been engaged in taking action, we're so glad that we can all work together. As Elise alluded to, right, we're at an inflection point right now. On a national level, hopefully as we're emerging from COVID, right, we have this new awareness of the racial and economic inequities present in America. And on a state level, here in Massachusetts, right, there's an open mayoral race in Boston for only the second time in nearly 40 years, coupled with statewide elections next year. So if we could channel that awareness into action, right, and really, really ask candidates, push them, right, to have substantive policies on the question, what are you going to do to address desegregation, right? That's sort of the hope of this panel. On a quick logistical note, right, the chat is open, so we encourage you, right, to add your thoughts, add your questions in the chat. There will be Q&A towards the end of the session as well. And it's just one of the wonderful things about Zoom is being able to have multiple conversations, right? Conversations alongside what we'll be talking about. All right, so For the first portion of the panel, we want to begin by taking a look at the state of segregation, integration, and inclusion in 2021, and hear from our panelists about what it's like to go to school in, live in, and work in both majority white communities and more inclusive communities, right? And we'll consider what, if anything, is working in terms of strategies for integration and consider the work that still needs to be done. So Dania, if you wouldn't mind, we're going to start with you. And we want to start by talking about METCO, right, which is one of the longest running models of voluntary school desegregation in the country. The program celebrated its 50th anniversary recently, right, which is both a testament to its strengths and also a potential wake-up call, right, or time to ask ourselves, why haven't we made further progress, right, as a state in integrating our schools and communities? So Dania, if you could, can you share with us some of what your experiences have been like? What are the benefits of attending Wellesley Public Schools, and what are the challenges?
The challenges, one of the challenges is waking up very early for most sunrises. The bus ride is pretty long. And then after getting there, we have to wait a whole hour before starting our first class. I mean, that could be, that is good and bad at the same time because we're sitting doing nothing, or I can go get help on something I didn't finish the night before. One of the good things of going to Wellesley Public Schools is the people that support me, the teachers that know I can do it and know that I have the power to do it. The teachers that when I need help, I can go to. Just overall people that I could go to for help. The friendships that I've built are really good, really good. Yeah, just the support, I would say, is really good.
All right, thank you, Dania. I do wonder, I think you presented a lot about sort of the benefits, and you talked a little bit about some of the early morning challenges, and I'm wondering if there are any other challenges you might want to speak to. Certainly, I know as a teacher at Newton North, right, students in the METCO program at Newton have talked about, in addition to that outright, the early sunrise, having to wake up, and then the hour waiting time, there are probably additional things that you may have encountered.
The additional things that I may have encountered, the fact that we do wake up early, we may not have time to eat, but the good thing is that at school they do provide breakfast, and if we are more hungry, they provide more. One thing that I've also encountered is if you're bored, it's a way to research and inform and bring knowledge to yourself for the next class. So what I do in the morning for an hour is I either finish the homework I didn't do, read up on like the syllabuses we have, or get extra help. So I don't just say, don't really do anything, just get help and be active.
All right, thank you so much for sharing that. Gretchen, if we could turn to you and have you talk about you and your family's experiences living in Needham. It's a community that is 83% non-Hispanic white, 9% Asian AAPI, 3% Black African American, and 3% Hispanic Latino. To what extent have you found Needham, to be inclusive?
Okay, Thank you, Charlene, and thank you, Dania. I enjoyed listening to Dania's comments. So we are a family of 5. We have 3 children, 2 boys who are now in college, but who started off in Needham Public Schools when we first moved here almost 7 years ago. We're just a few months away from our 7th anniversary in Massachusetts and in Needham. And we have a daughter who is in the 10th grade now, but she is now at an independent school. We did switch her. And there's reasons behind that having to do with inclusion. It's interesting because our children had previously attended schools that were highly racially integrated, where we moved from. We lived in 2 other areas where our children had gone to school, in the Washington, D.C. area, specifically Silver Spring, Maryland, and in Oak Park, Illinois. And these are both very integrated suburbs. And so the schools were as integrated as the towns were. And so for us moving to Needham, we moved to Needham for the same reasons that most families would move to any community. Safe streets, great schools, family-friendly community was all the good stuff that we'd heard. And so we moved to the town because of that. Even in knowing about the racial demographics. So we came in with our eyes wide open from that perspective. But I think overall we were early on. I know there have been some things that have changed in Needham schools in the years since, so I do want to say that. But when we arrived, we felt that there was an overall lack of inclusion in general, and with regard to there being more inclusive curriculum. Black History Month was not celebrated in any kind of way, nor were other kind of cause months, so to speak, that around different racial and ethnic heritage. We also found, and one of the reasons why we ultimately moved our daughter in particular, we found that in the 6th grade that children were separated by academic clusters, which is the traditional system in Needham middle schools. But what we discovered when she was just beginning 6th grade was that all of the students who were marked, if you will, or who were assumed to be of African descent, who were assumed to be Black, were all assigned to the same academic cluster. And that this was all kind of at the time being done under the radar of parents, of the school community. We were told when we discovered it that it was because of the hope that these students would not feel racially isolated. However, there were a whole series of troubling factors around that, especially when parents are not aware of a practice that had been ongoing for, at that time, about a decade, that other parents had tried to address unsuccessfully. And so once we discovered that, and it was one of the students who actually discovered it and brought it to the parents, we decided that we needed to do something about that because the impact of the practice had some troubling outcomes for the young people, for the students, that the school had not been monitoring or exploring over the years. And so, to make a long story short, we gathered together as a parent community, several of the parents of these students who were both students in the METCO program and families who lived in Needham, who had Black students at the school. And ultimately, we were able to push for a racial equity audit of the entire school district, not just the middle schools, but K through 12. And a report that came from that can be found on Needham School's website. And the school district has been doing a lot of work since then in the aftermath of that. So I guess we kind of walked in and I guess started making good trouble right away after we discovered that. I'm the daughter of a teacher, a longtime educator who retired a couple of years ago. And she was always someone who modeled that for my siblings and myself, that if you saw something that was wrong, you had to do something about it. And I think she's on here tonight too, but that was really at the heart of why we pushed for change even after deciding to have our children go elsewhere to school, to independent schools. And we were fortunate that we were able to do that. But that was, the impetus for us doing that. But I remained active in the Needham Public Schools even after doing that, because I knew that I care about other people's children as well. And I want other people's children to also have equitable experience as well. So I just wanted to share that. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Gretchen. It's on the one hand, a powerful story of the kind of change that can be made, right? And a troubling story, and potentially one that, is one among many. David, we're going to ask you a little bit about your experiences. So you grew up in Boston and attended the Boston Public Schools. How do you think that experience of diversity affected your education?
Thank you, and thanks for having me on the panel. Yes, I grew up in Dorchester. I went to the Boston Public Schools. This was in like the 80s and 90s, so kind of in the wake of busing. My experience, I think I would say, spoke to both the kind of difficulty and the gain of integration. I think integration can be difficult, both in whether it's in schooling and neighborhoods and such, but ultimately for me at least was a pretty important experience in my life. So I'd say in the lower grades of Boston Public Schools, there was a really racially integrated friendship networks, and that started to change as we got older. I went to Boston Latin School, and there was a lot of sort of self-segregation, I guess you'd say, there. Things changed. There were some racial tensions that would later surface with the Black at BLS campaign that you folks might remember from a few years ago, where some of the Black students at BLS spoke out about their experience. That certainly was happening when I was there, not in the social media era, so it didn't get as much attention perhaps. But and I think even despite all that, I think for me to have exposure to different cultures, to have a real firsthand sense for people who came from different economic backgrounds, very much shaped my view of the world and enriched my education. I mean, I think I remember those experiences more than I remember any Latin class or algebra class. That's kind of what really sticks with you and shapes you in the long run. And so I think my takeaway from that would be the value of integration, even in the face of difficulty.
Thank you very much. Before we shift gears a little bit, I do want to just sort of add a little bit and talk a little bit about sort of the experiences of Asian American APA families in suburban communities. I think sometimes there is a tendency, right, to sort of think about Asian American families in suburban communities, right, as sort of the families who add diversity and have somehow, quote unquote, made it, right? That sometimes there's a linking together of white and APA families. And I would just encourage us to kind of think about the sorts of challenges that APA families navigate in these suburban communities. That to begin with, just to sort of think about, there are economic disparities even within Asian American families in these communities. I know certainly there are APA alum from Newton North who will come back and sort of talk about, I didn't grow up in as high a socioeconomic bracket as a lot of my friends. And it was really difficult to sort of talk about that, right? And sometimes the assumption is that APA families are all sort of the high achieving students, a higher socioeconomic bracket as well. So I think it's worth keeping in mind that there is this economic diversity or disparity. Another thing just to sort of put out there, right, is the damaging effect of the model minority myth, right? This idea that Asian Americans are high achieving, high performing, that pressure is an immense one on AAPI students. And, students often talk about feeling that pressure to live up to that, right, is really challenging. Students will sometimes talk about going for extra help somewhere in a class, right? And teachers may not spend as much time with them, right? Or may sort of be like, here, why don't you work together in this group? Because of this sort of sense of, you probably have it handled. It's also worth kind of considering the mental health challenges that many Asian American students face. That there are statistics that sort of say US born Asian American women have sort of a higher lifetime rate of suicidal thoughts than the general population. And that for Asian Americans aged 20 to 24, suicide is the leading cause of death, with sort of 33%. So I think those are things sort of worth considering. And then the final thing I would throw out there is, right, certainly in 2020 to 2021, I think a lot of Asian Americans are realizing, right, that these places they call home may not necessarily feel like home, with this sort of uptick in anti-Asian American violence and racism that, again, students in Newton have talked about. I'll be walking somewhere with my siblings, right? And somebody will drive by, they'll say something racist, right? Or somebody will cough. And so I think, right, these are tendencies that have always been present historically, and that the pandemic has really brought these to the fore, right? So it's kind of worth thinking about for Asian American families, right? The sense of, well, they're living in these suburban communities, right? But to what extent are they fully part of those communities? All right, we're gonna shift a little bit now. We're gonna think about context and causes, and then we'll have opportunities to have even more open conversation. So we'll be considering, right, how did we get here? Or maybe more accurately, why are we still having conversations about segregation, about desegregation in 2021, right, that maybe aren't that materially different from conversations 50 years ago? So I think we're gonna ask Liam, I believe he has some fancy visuals for us. All right, so here is sort of a chart about student demographics in METCO districts. And right now, I'll just put it out there, I'm an English teacher, so staring at charts always makes me sweat, right? So hopefully we can sort of look at the charts together. Oh, Liam is muted.
Hi, sorry about that. It didn't let me mute initially. So I think you were doing a perfect job. This is just some high-level data from a report that was in David's Boston Globe piece, and the model of it was on a national report called Fault Lines. That was done by a national education research group that was featured heavily in several of the Democratic presidential campaigns and influencing how some of the national and potential federal change is happening. And they really focused in on school boundaries. And so I'm a Needham native, and the Needham Boston border is not the longest border. Obviously, there's other people here whose districts share a larger border with Boston, but still it is pretty stark to consider just a couple streets over or a couple hundred yards has such a big difference in the share of economically disadvantaged students in a system. And it's something that at the national level did seem to wake a lot of people up. And for me personally, as someone who grew up in Needham and then returned here with children, really was a stark wake-up call to just think of it through that prism and through other conversations in Needham, and hearing what Gretchen said, it really does jump out. So it looks like on the screen now is a slide just with some high-level data from the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education's website, using their data on student demographics from some select METCO METCO districts with the share. And so the prior slide showed economically disadvantaged at 58% in Boston, and a border community, Needham, at 5%, similar in Wellesley and several other communities. Brookline and Newton are more in the 10 to 11% range on economically disadvantaged, and here you can see the differences in racial breakdown.
All right, thank you very much. It's not a Zoom meeting until somebody is muted who shouldn't be, right, or somebody unmutes who shouldn't unmute. So, and also thank you, Liam, for saving me from having to interpret that data in real time. So what we're gonna ask David to do is talk a little bit about, right, your piece in the Globe compiled this data that was very striking in ways that the data we just saw showed us. So could you talk to us a little bit about what this data reveals and what you think people might misunderstand about the realities of today?
Sure. So Liam, who you just heard, is with a group called Policy for Progress that was launched to look at some of these issues of segregation, among other issues. And his group conducted a poll, which I cited in the story this past summer, I believe. And one of the questions they asked people, this was Massachusetts voters, was, do you believe that segregation, racial segregation in Massachusetts public schools has gotten better or worse, et cetera? Only 17% of people thought that segregation had gotten worse in the last 50 years in Massachusetts. There's some truth to that. Some of our suburban communities have gotten more diverse, in part because of Asian American migration, which you were talking about, Charlene, to the suburbs, but also just broader growth in immigration in general. Had more Latino folks in the state as well, and you see some of that in these suburbs. But these communities, by any measure, are still highly segregated. We're talking, 84, 85, 90% white communities in some of these most affluent towns around Boston. And meanwhile, some of the number of schools that are intensely segregated, non-white intensely segregated schools, meaning 90% or more of the students in these schools are students of color, has grown by more than a third in just the last decade alone. So we're seeing growing racial isolation for students of color all over the state. And it's happening in places that the sort of geography of this is shifted. We're not just talking about greater Boston, Boston and the immediate communities. It's sort of migrated out across the state. I write in the story some about Lynn, for instance, which used to be one of the most racially integrated school systems in the state, and has grown highly segregated just in the last 10, 20 years. And with greater and greater Latino immigration to the state, we're seeing Latino students growing more racially isolated. This used to be more of a white-black issue in the state, and it's not anymore. So I think those are some of the kind of high-level pieces that, as the polling suggests, people don't quite understand. And then there's just the question of geography. We sort of tend to think that these borders between various cities and towns are somehow natural preordained borders. That's just the way life is. But it doesn't have to be that way when it comes to schools. METCO, for instance, has been sending students across those borders for decades now. And in my piece, I write some about Greater Hartford. And for a couple of decades now, as the result of a lawsuit, they have had a series of magnet schools built all over the region, some of them in the city of Hartford itself, some in the suburbs, and students from both the suburbs, largely white and Asian students, and students from the city of Hartford, largely Black and Latino, attend these magnet schools together. So there are ways to cross these lines. We just have to have the political will to do it.
All right, thank you, David. Dania and Gretchen, could you speak a little bit about what you connect with, what resonates from what David's shared with us, or what you might want to add?
Dania, I'm going to defer to you. You want to go first?
What was on the screen? I believe that We are very diversified with Wellesley and Boston students. And I believe that with all of us helping, we could change. We could change the diversification. We could come together and be one and be united as one. So.
Thank you, Dania. I love her inspirational tone. I'll share that, like when my family first arrived, you can probably imagine being me walking down Highland Avenue in Needham. At the time, 7 years ago, I would say I actually would have a knee-jerk reaction with my neck, actually, if I actually saw another Black person walking in public at the same time I was. I don't feel that way as much these days, that there have families of color, and I mean families across the spectrum of racial identity, who have moved to the town in the last 7 years. I can see it visually. I can visually pick up on that, but then also the most recent census data tells us that too. I know what the census data looked like when we got here, and I know what I've seen the most recent census data. So there has been some change, but I get concerned that when I think about METCO, which of course was put into place to serve a really good purpose, but I think, I'm sure somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that when METCO was first created, it was created to be a temporary organization at the time, because the thought was, and I'm not trying to say that it shouldn't exist at all, but I believe that when it was first put in place, it was put in place to be a temporary organization until certain changes could be made in suburban communities, so that those communities would be more racially integrated, and therefore the schools would be more racially integrated, and therefore an organization like that serving its particular purpose would no longer have a need to exist. So I do find it interesting that over 50 years later, I don't know that the conditions under which METCO was created have dissipated at all. I really do wonder. I mean, I wasn't here 50 plus years ago when the organization first began, but I've done a lot of reading and research and, looking at old articles and so forth. And it just doesn't appear that the integration issues in the suburban communities have changed that much. The markers haven't changed that much. Even it's been very, very, very small change, very little change over the years. And so I wonder about that. And I wonder that by having an organization like METCO that did the overall metro area, the community, the city and the suburbs lose its urgency to make the changes so that the communities are more racially integrated anyway. So I just wonder about that. And I know that there are other communities other urban, suburban partner districts over the years that have seen, I believe, greater success in doing this. I would suggest taking a look at Oak Park, Illinois, where we lived for a while. Oak Park in 1972 actually made some major changes. Their housing authority made some major changes in order to encourage racial integration in the town, which then, of course, led to racial integration in the schools. And it was a bold step at the time. It wasn't always popular at the time, but now it's a mainstay. These are mainstay policies there that have continued to allow that integration. Columbia, Maryland, in Howard County, Maryland is another community. Valencia, California. I mean, there's a number of communities around that have seen, I think, between the urban and suburban schools have seen greater success in racial integration. So I just wonder about urgency. And I just wonder if indeed the suburban communities want more racial integration, you know, because generally when somebody wants something, you find a way to get it. You find a way to make it happen if it's something you truly want. So I do wonder if we should be looking introspectively as suburban communities at who we are and what we truly want. And are we asking ourselves, you know, what we should be doing actively and proactively if indeed we want to see further racial integration. So that is something that I just wanted to kind of put out there. I'm a child of integration myself. I grew up partially in just outside of Atlanta in the 70s when the 1954 Brown versus Board of Education had not been enforced in a lot of Georgia communities. And so, you know, some of us were some of those kids that, you know, were the very handful of children who were in some of those schools when the enforcement policies were being put through. And so I know what it's like to be Dania, even though Dania's situation is, you know, it was certainly, I assume on her part, voluntary by her family. And so, but I liked, I'm just saying that because I do empathize, Dania, with many of the things that you probably have experienced that I experienced in part as a child. But I just wonder if the urgency is there. And so I ask us all to question that. And if we don't feel that it's urgent, but we're in a conversation like this one, why do we not feel it's urgent? What are we not doing that we should be doing? So that's just some thoughts.
Thank you so much, Gretchen. And I think that's a perfect transition to our next question, right? So to inject some of that urgency, can we talk about what are the benefits for all children of having diverse communities?
I can
And we
speak to
could
some
sort
of
of
the,
just,
go ahead. I was going to say I could speak to some of the research that I looked at in writing this piece. I mean, you know, the research, there's about a half century of research now that shows that segregated schools are highly correlated with lower academic performance, less college attendance, lower adult earnings for students of color in this country. It's kind of beyond dispute now that is the case. There's lots of reasons for that. There are, you know, better resourced schools in some of these better off communities. And it's also just difficult if you have a lot of low-income students in one school to account for that. And then on the other side, there's lots of benefits to integration in terms of you know, creativity and thinking, understanding of other cultures, creating the kind of folks that companies increasingly want these days to employ, people who can navigate different cultures and relate to different people. So there's a pretty good research base now for integration and its value for students, be they white, Black, Latino, Asian American, et cetera. So I think that's pretty solid. And again, it's just a matter of kind of political will.
thank you, David. I think actually, I'm not as fast at reading the chat as Millie is, but I think Millie wants to speak to something that you said, Gretchen. So Millie, if you would like.
Yes, thank you so much, Charlene. So I just wanted to speak to what Gretchen said about the urgency and about has integration truly happened. And Gretchen, I'm really right there with you. I mean, just because, you know, at least in our METCO communities, just because we're there, it doesn't necessarily mean that there has been significant changes. At least in my opinion, you know, I started as a mother. For those of you that don't know, that's how I started, like 13 years ago as a mother. No, I don't have a child that old. I started with the METCO program 10 years ago. So I was a mother for 7 years before getting on in this job. You know, and the integration part it's really a crisis, just like David actually says in his article. You know, we are there, but we are there. Sometimes I feel like we're there, like, you know, like in a seat, you know, but are we changing the community that we're in? Are we really having that intentionality and that insistence that I mentioned earlier today, and that inspiration to continue to change? And, I wanted to say something really quick that the last time that we had a spike in METCO community, in the growth of METCO communities was when MLK was assassinated. When he was assassinated, we went from like 12 communities to like over 20 communities because there was a sense of urgency for people to respond. We haven't had that sense of urgency again till this summer when George Floyd was killed. After George Floyd was killed, I received at least 8 emails from other districts who said, we're racially isolated. This is a crisis. We want to be part of the METCO program. So that's another discussion that we're looking to get into. But I don't want us to start getting more METCO districts if they don't do some work beforehand. And I think that's what's actually missing, in the METCO program right now. And I think that's, there's been a sense of urgency that I've seen, at least in our METCO leadership. After this happened, we took a statement of solidarity this past summer. We came together, we said, we can do better, we will do better. Districts started to actually adopt the anti-racist resolutions, all of our METCO districts. There were new positions started for DEI directors in a lot of our towns. And we started this anti-racism roadmap that HQ is actually facilitating, where we're providing actually professional development. We're providing equity audits, just like I saw in the chat. I have Lee Title here, who was one of the founders of the Harvard Rights Program, and he's providing 5 of our districts starting next week, an intense year-long project to look at a problem of practice around racial equity and actually work with the district in bringing about change. We have Natick, who did an equity audit with one of our partners. We have Marblehead and Linfield right now, who just take on a journey of what it means to become a racialized human being, and what does that mean in your practice. So I think that's the intentionality that we have to continue to work on, and we can't just be there and just accept the kids in the classroom. Someone mentioned here, is everybody saying that they're a METCO student? And that is part of the METCO goal that we have. The METCO's kids are not just the Boston kids. You are participating in a METCO program. You are a METCO student. You are a METCO district. And when people begin to accept that belief, they're going to begin to look at things differently. But it's not only about how our students are being treated and received. If we're really talking about being anti-racist education institutions, we got to look at our hiring practices. We have to look at our curriculum. We have to look at our discipline practices. And those are the things, Gretchen, that I want to see happen in every single METCO community. There's something to be said about being a METCO district. You're a METCO district because you made a voluntary commitment to accept integration. And you can't just sit there and accept the kids and count the number and not do something and some real introspection into yourself, into your practices, into your decisions, and really begin to bring about change. We have our first 2 Black male superintendents coming in July 1, Brookline and Wayland. These are steps. These are steps, the resolutions, the school committees coming to a lot of our events, really wanting to see what they can do. We have, our elected officials who are supporting, the work of METCO and having given us a decrease in the last 3 years, which is a big deal. We were at a point where things were going down and now we're going up. And really trying to use those dollars to really bring about some change around professional development and curriculum and hiring. So I think we have a lot of work to do. I think for 55 years, next week is our 50-year anniversary for METCO. And for 55 years, we've existed. And I think now we need to transform. And I really hope that all of you guys here can help us in really pushing your districts to really make a difference and to really be intentional about every decision that gets made, because it's not for our METCO students from Boston, it's for all students. Every single student deserves an anti-racist education, because these are the kids that are going to be voting later. These are the kids that are going to be hiring. These are the kids that are going to be making decisions about what they allow in their neighborhood. And we can't lose this opportunity. So I really hope that the METCO districts that are here today are going to really take that on to a next level. And I'm telling you, I'm seeing it. I'm in the front line, and the districts are coming ahead and they're saying, I want to do better, and they're making decisions. But I think this is a new day. It's a new day. Thank you for letting me share that.
Thank you so much, Millie. And that is a perfect transition to our final question, right, which is to sort of think about solutions. And you've already offered us a beginning list of really important solutions. So I invite the panelists, speak as the spirit moves you. What other sorts of solutions should we be thinking about?
I would say on the, I know there's been some talk in the chat about housing. Some of that is around zoning reform in these suburban communities that allow for more multifamily housing at different rates. But I would also say that it doesn't require just the building of housing. There are other ways to do this. There's a program in Baltimore that I've written about. Take Section 8 vouchers, which are these vouchers you can use to rent an apartment, and talks to these voucher holders, many of them single mothers, and says, here are some communities of opportunity that you could move to. They take them in a van and say, here's a school your kids could go to. Here's the local doctor's office. Here is a local landlord we've developed a relationship with. And you can leverage that housing voucher to housing in a community like this, where there is integrated schools and higher performing schools, and can really change kids' lives, particularly if they move at a young age. There is a small pilot program happening in Massachusetts now, which I see some chatter about in the chat. And so I think growing that in a real way could make a difference, short of building, actual affordable housing stock in these suburbs, which we also need to do. And then on the schooling front, an expansion of METCO is possible for sure. All these state reps listen to their local parents and local school boards. If they want to keep their jobs, they have to. So if you want to push for change in your town, talk to your local school board, talk to your local state rep, say, this is something I care about. And you might be able to push change at the state level that way. And a final avenue I'd raise is a lawsuit. That program in Hartford I spoke about earlier, all these magnet schools that have developed, that came out of a segregation lawsuit, desegregation lawsuit. This state is absolutely ripe for that kind of thing. If there are people listening to this who want to fund a lawsuit that could push real change, that is another way to approach this, particularly if change in Beacon Hill is too slow.
Oh, I'll jump in, I guess. Thank you, David. And David, I just wanted to piggyback off of what you were saying, because I went to high school in Columbia, Maryland, which is in Howard County, Maryland. And Columbia, Maryland was essentially an invented city. It now has city status, but it was an invented city. It was a gentleman named James Rouse, who was a very wealthy land developer, but who was also very much believed in racial integration. And back in the late 60s, and he went out into Howard County, Maryland, and he bought up thousands of acres of farmland, and he literally created a city from whole cloth. And he decided that, and he knew, after talking with a lot of folks about racial integration, he knew that one of the ways to truly make racial integration happen in this new city that he'd created called Columbia, they were going to have to do some innovative things around housing, around real estate, and how homes were bought and sold, so that there were not clusters of folks around race, for example, like racial clusters. There was a lot of creative thinking that was done in those early days of Columbia, Maryland. There's a lot of information about the town, about the city, actually online, if anybody's interested, studies that have been done and so forth. And there are also a lot of, there are several communities that tried to copy that social experiment of Columbia. There's a community in Virginia, Reston, Virginia is one of them, Valencia, California, which I mentioned earlier. And then again, Oak Park, Illinois had some symmetries to what was done, but it was more so that James Rouse went out there and created a brand new city. Now, I know that we don't have the ability to do that, but we can look at some of the practices that they put in place and some of the programs and policies that they put in place that actually did fuel racial integration in that area. And he wanted it to be a utopia, which I believe is what the word Columbia means, if I remember correctly. And so though no community is a true utopia, but I think the goal was that they really wanted to get as close as they possibly could to true racial integration there. But there were certain things that they had to do. And I think these suburban towns like Needham and Wellesley and so many others, we all have the ability to think creatively and to make hard decisions, like real decisions that are innovative in nature, that that will invite greater racial integration. But I think we all have to, again, we have to want it, number one. We have to know why we want it so that we can make the case for it with our neighbors and our policymakers. But we have to know why we want it, and then we have to work for it. So I think that, what we've seen is that there have been successful examples around the country. So we don't have to reinvent the wheel even. We can utilize successful cases around the country and take those things that seem like we can emulate them here, and then try them on and see if they work. But I think we still just have to, we have to get into gear. We've got to get into action. And I think that all of us who are voters, I'm going to endorse what David said, all of us who are voters, if this is something that we truly want in our suburban communities, then we have to vote for it. We have to let our legislators know that it's what we want, so that they too will be in partnership with us. And we have to also speak to our school superintendents. We have to let them know what we want. If we want METCO, then you ask for METCO. If you want a school superintendent who will really get on board with matters around inclusion, racial and social inclusion, then reach out to your school superintendents, reach out to your school committees, let them know what you want. And because, we're the folks in the community that pay their bills, if you will. So, I mean, we have a lot more power in all of this than I think people realize, and we can do it.
Thank you.
Charlene, I'm going to just say something real quick. I see a very important person here, very important guest that arrived a little while ago, Senator Jason Lewis, who represents 3 of our towns, Reading, Malden, and Melrose. But more importantly, he is the chair of education and really responsible for putting our line item through, along with our 2 champions at the State House, and ensuring that METCO gets the funding that it needs. And I see, Senator Lewis here. I don't know if he has anything he wants to say or contribute to this conversation. I see a lot of things in the chat about holding districts to a certain level of accountability. Is there, are there some things that the districts have to abide to in order to become a METCO districts? I saw that Jay Kaufman, talked about our school committees doing, a survey around inclusion, to ensure that, we have the right committee members there. But there's a lot of things, that we can think about strategically, moving forward. So I don't know if Senator Lewis, if you want to say hello or say a few words, but as you know, the education is part of the conversation here today, and that's what you're responsible for at the House, at the Senate. So we're really happy for your support, for ensuring this last year that in the middle of a pandemic, we were able not only to get our funding for the METCO program, but even get an increase, which was unreal and almost unimaginable, that we were able to do that. So the State House is really supporting us right now, and want to thank you personally for what you did to make that happen. So if we can pin him, that would be great, guys.
Thank you, Millie. Thank you so much. This is Senator Jason Lewis, and it's so great to be with you. And I'm so sorry I wasn't with you from the beginning of the conversation, because it is such an important conversation that you're all having. And I know we also have David Scharfenberg from the Boston Globe, and the piece that ran in the Globe highlighting how segregated our public schools are and how it's become even worse in recent decades was really disturbing and shocking to read. And so we have to tackle this, and lots of good examples, that you've been sharing, and good work that is going on in some of our communities. And there definitely are elected officials, in our local communities and at the state level. I can tell you that really do care a lot about finding ways to better integrate our communities in our schools, and to pursue anti-racism policies. And we have to seize the momentum. We did seize it with police reform and accountability last session, and we need to do the same in the months and years ahead, around housing, education, healthcare disparities, environmental justice. So we've got our work cut out for us, but really looking forward to, I know many of you, and look forward to working together in this legislative session. And thank you so much for the work that you're all doing. It's critically important for our students.
Thank you so much, Senator Lewis. I think we have time for a little Q&A. So Dania, we're going to start with you. And first I'm going to invite you. I saw a lot of nodding while we were talking about solutions. So I'm wondering if there's anything you'd like to add to that. And then there's a question from the audience for you, asking you to talk a little bit about how much you've made connections with the majority white student populations in the schools you've attended.
So about the first question, what was it? I believe that like when the pandemic lets up, hopefully soon, that we should have social events and like bring the suburban people and show them where we live. Like we go out there, they should come here. We should connect, do social events, sit down over some brunch, since we're on Zoom, but over some brunch and talk if we want things to be done, if we want things to change. Yeah, it takes time. Yes, it takes a lot of time, but it's been 55 years. So how about now? And the second question, I would say I don't have a lot of white friends. Actually don't really have any. But I do call them my acquaintances. We work well together in school projects. We work well in like at lunch. Like I call them my school friends. But my best friends, we are minorities. So my best friend Kira, she's Asian as well. And my best friend Neymar, she's Puerto Rican. And I'm Black. So those are the people that I call on. Those are the people that I go over their houses. We talk every day. But overall, they care about me. So do my family. But yeah, I don't have a lot of white friends. We are social at school. We are talk day to day. Oh, is there homework? Yeah, there is. Just like on checking up if there's homework, just seeing if things need to be done in class. But outside of school, I don't really have any white friends.
Thank you so much for the thoughtfulness and the honesty of your answers. And hopefully, yeah, let's make those right Zoom brunches happen where we can connect with each other. So final question is a question about audits, right? If we already have this data, why have more auditing? To see where resources should go, just to confirm the problem. Any thoughts on that?
Hi, did you mean like equity audits of a school district?
I believe so, yes.
So I can speak to the audit process that we went through for Needham Public Schools. Yeah, and I think I saw a few questions in the chat earlier on when this was mentioned, but you know, in our case, we had to make the case for this kind of years-long practice that Needham schools had been doing around assigning Black students to the same academic cluster. And then from that practice emerged additional questions for us as a parent group about, well, what has the impact of this practice been on our children over the years? Have the schools been monitoring the impacts of the practice? Do we know for sure that the practice is actually helpful? Have there been surveys done of the kids? Have there been, any kind of conversations with the children about whether or not this practice is beneficial? And or are there aspects of it that are troubling for the kids? For some of the children we spoke to at the time, there were actually some troubling effects of that were not necessarily apparent to the school administration. And so we took all of this to them, and we asked that either A, the practice be stopped altogether, unless a family wanted to voluntarily have their child be part of something like that, or B, bring it back into the light, instead of it being sort of a practice that was underground, if you will, or kind of was not being shared or communicated with the school community, nor to the parents. So just so that you're aware, the parents were not aware of the practice either until it was discovered, so to speak. So we were able to kind of take this particular issue and then use that as a launching point for requesting an entire audit of the school district, because we knew that if something like this was going on in the middle schools, chances are there were some other practices that might have also been going on in the elementary schools, at the high school level. We wanted to get a broader sense of what are some of the practices and policies that are in place in this particular school district that may be race-based or identity-based in any way. What are those things? And so that was kind of the launching pad for ultimately what turned into our request, wasn't really a request, a demand for the equity audit. And we were, like I said, through a series of events, we're able to get the school district to agree to that. And then we were able to work in partnership with the school district to choose a consultant who ultimately was the one who carried out the audit and the report and who presented to the school district after it was all done. And so it really was a process. We had to be in it long term. It was a marathon and not a sprint. And we had to really make strong cases all along for why we felt it was important that the district needed to look at itself introspectively. And the idea was, no one's trying to say that this school district is not a quality school district that has a lot to offer to a lot of young people. But what we are trying to say is that there are some troubling aspects of the school district that we feel need to be addressed for the kids who people don't tend to think about as much. And those were, the kids of different racial backgrounds as well as socioeconomic backgrounds. So there was a whole process there, but that audit, there were a series of questions. And if you're part of a group, a parent group working in tandem with the school district, you have the ability to weigh in on what kinds of questions should be addressed in an audit. What are the things you're curious about? What are the data points that you want to know that you may not know, that may not be apparent to those of us in the public? And then you ask for what you feel that you need. So it was an entire process, but at the end of it, there was so much that came to light that was going on in the district, both some of it good, some of it troubling. And so, and it was compelling enough that the school district has put in place a permanent administrative body of administrators, faculty, members of the community, kind of a permanent group that kind of oversees the execution of a lot of the recommendations of that report. So it can be done. So if anybody's interested, I'm happy to share more offline after this is over. But it was a process that we had to be willing to be committed to, and that a lot of families in the community are still committed to as the community moves forward on this.
Charlene, I want to add something regarding what Gretchen said. There is a current research happening right now. Somebody actually just asked me that on the chat, but we have a research going on right now for the METCO program that's going to be extremely intense. The largest and the most involved research in the history of the METCO program is run by an economist professor out of Tufts University. Her name is Elizabeth Citron. I asked Colin if he can find the invite, or if you can call in for her upcoming event. But she is researching the impact of the METCO program in METCO communities in comparison to those communities that do not participate in the METCO program. She's looking at MCAS data. There's a question there in the MCAS about inclusion and how people feel, and she is comparing that answer to non-participating METCO districts. She is looking at interracial marriages of the alumni of the METCO program. She's looking at housing selections and where they tend to go and move when they become adults. She's looking at voting practices and also at income, career choices. This has never been done before. So very slowly, we are going to be releasing that data as she finishes parts of it, because it is a very extensive research. The Boston Foundation was funding it along with a federal grant that she received to really do some intensity at looking at this. And in terms of the audits that Gretchen was talking about, if anybody here is a METCO district, we are working with this program called Beloved Community to get equity audits done for free at all of our METCO communities as a starting point, so that you can then get your own consultant later and do it deeper. But we do have, we are working with a community, and we are offering it to all of our towns. So if you work in any of those towns and you haven't done it and you can push for that, I mean, that's one of my goals, is to ensure that every single METCO district starts off with an audit around equity. You should be able to look internally at what you need to do, and we fund the resource to get it done for free. But not everybody is jumping in that opportunity. So if you are at a district and you can push for that, you can get a starting point by one of our partnerships. In addition to what we're doing with the professional development with Dr. Lee Title, we're also doing free equity audits too. So we are trying to do things to turn things around in our METCO towns by providing all the resources that they need to pay attention to things like this, by making it super easy and accessible. That research is coming, and it's going to be extremely exciting to see 50 years worth of history. And she's looking into all the alumni patterns, and also at the patterns of the school system that participate versus those who don't. And her name is Elizabeth Citron from Tufts University. And she's already doing something right now next month about the impact of the METCO program on suburban students. She already did some research on that and found that there was no negative impacts at all about to the suburban students by having METCO students there, because obviously the opposition was saying by bringing METCO students to our towns, there's some negative impact on that. And she researched that and found that there was no negative impact at all. So those are, things that we're working on as well. I wanted to just share that.
All right, thank you so much. I recognize we're approaching the 9 o'clock mark. And so I think we're probably gonna have to put a pause on this conversation for now, but obviously it's a conversation we're gonna carry out, right, to the different communities we move through. So I wanna end my portion by just asking everyone to fill your screens with visual noise and give the panelists a round of applause. Thank you so much for this wonderful conversation. Thank you, thank you. And I'm gonna pass the mic to Colin.
Can make actual noise. That's great. So I get to just bring us back to METCO for a second. As Millie mentioned, we have the opportunity to convene. That's sort of most of the work of METCO day to day is happening in the districts with the METCO directors and the METCO staff and all of the teachers and parents and communities. But what we can do at the Boston office is look out at these constituents that don't often get to connect. The Boston students and families who entrust the suburbs with their children's education, the suburban communities, the people like me who have the kind of electoral power to influence our school districts, and of course, the hardworking administrators and teachers in the center. And what we really want to try to do is ask everyone to see where they are in this map and to align ourselves to making a change toward this vision. And the vision, as we're articulating it, is that every student in a METCO district, as Millie said, not every quote METCO student, not every Black and brown student, but every student whose district partners with METCO will experience an inclusive, equitable, and anti-racist education. That means more than just a diverse education. It means an education that is dismantling the white supremacist mythologies that we've all grown up with, and helping each of us become Americans who are working to end racism in this country, in our towns, in our communities. So thanks for being here. If this panel tells me anything, it's that none of us in our racial justice groups can make this change on our own, that being able to make this change together is what's going to make it work. So I urge you to connect with Forge, with METCO. There's take a screenshot of this or take a picture for some good upcoming events to check out that we just happen to have noticed or that have been related to some of our panelists. There is a lot of dialogue happening and a lot of work happening. Do stay involved and keep the conversation going. You're going to get an email from METCO with a couple of key links that were dropped in the chat, as well as a survey. We'd love you to let us know how you like this event. And also let us know if you would like to be a part of this METCO effort. We are assembling working groups. We're assembling teams from across these districts to be a part of the campaigns, the advocacy, the organizing, the learning that we're all going to do together, and make this a really a pivotal and historic moment, just as it was in 1966 when METCO was founded. So with that, I thank our amazing panelists, Charlene, David, Dania, and Gretchen. That, we can make some noise. And I thank Millie, and I thank Vanita for helping to put this together, and Liam for providing us with that fantastic data as we started. Best this evening. Have a good night. I will now play us out.